Okay, here we are. I'm finally going to talk about the 100 best books of the 21st century. This is a book list that has been much discussed and dissected and has been revamped into reader's version instead of a critic's version, has been talked about by booktubers and recreated there. And I guess I'm going to add my 2 cents. I'm basically just going to go through this list and I'm going to talk about if I've read the books, or if they're on my own TBR in terms of I already have them and want to read them. If I've read the book, I'm going to discuss whatever thoughts I still have about them because chances are I probably read them a while ago. At least that's my guess. And if I own the book and want to read it, I'll talk about why I want to read it. The vast majority of the rest, and I'm sure it will be the vast majority, I'm just going to go through. I'm not going to take the time to read each and every single one and talk about my thoughts on each. I just think that would be a super long video. And I don't know that I would have a lot of thoughts on these. A lot of these books have been out for a while, and I figure if I've wanted to read them, I would already own them by this point. So let's just go ahead and get going through the list and see what we come up with. I kind of consider this a challenge. I want to know how many of these books have I actually read, and it'll be interesting to see if I think they really are some of the best books of the 21st century. I don't know how much insight I can give into that because I don't tend to read a lot of books published in the 21st century. But let's give it a shot and see what happens. Okay, the first book is number 93, which is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this is a book that I read just this year, I want to say in June. So actually, surprisingly, pretty recently, which is also interesting that it's on this list. I guess it's been out for a while. And I enjoyed this book. I thought it was really good. I felt like there were a few too many subplots in this book, and that kind of took away some enjoyment in reading it for me, but I believe I gave it either a 3 or a 4 stars. So it was a good book. Best book of the 21st century, even to make it in the top 100. I don't know about that, but I know it was very, very popular amongst a lot of readers. And, as it says on the title, it was a National Book Award finalist, and it was an HBO series, which I think may have helped the readership of this some. So there you go. Okay, Septology by John Foss. So it is a bind up of a couple of his novels, is how it has come out in English. I first heard about this book from Eyes on Indie. It is one that is on my own TBR. I have not read it. I'm somewhat intimidated by this book because I know it's stream of consciousness, which is sort of a more postmodern style, I guess, that I'm not always a big fan of. So we'll see how it goes with this book. But there was something about the storyline, or I guess the topic, I guess is more what it would be, that this book was on, which I don't even recall anymore. That was what initiated my wanting to read it. We'll see how it goes once I pick it up. This is probably one of the books that I'm most skeptical about, that I've purchased in like the last 6 months. Okay, I'm doing some big leaps here. I went from 79 to 61, which is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This is a book that is on my own TBR and has my excitement about reading this book waned from the beginning of the year. Yes, yes, it has. I think I became interested in this book because I was on a wave of high from reading David Copperfield, which I love, love, loved. And then while I was reading that book, I think this book came out. And yeah, so it just seemed so well hyped and was a retelling of a story that I loved, that I thought I would love this too. I've at this point picked it up twice to give it a try and just have not gotten into the dialect. I think I'm going to try it again. Well, I know I'm going to try it again, but this time I think it will be with the audiobook, and we'll see how that goes. Coming in at number 57, Nickel and Dimed, I have read. And in fact, I also taught this book as a nonfiction work to my students in a high school English class. And they were quite shocked and very impressed by this book. This was one of the books that I did not have to drag them to get through. As soon as one student came in outraged by what they had read, all the rest of the students caught up on the reading very quickly and very few fell behind. I remember just how talked about this book was when it first came out, how shocked people were, and how much expectation there were that things were going to change. Sadly, I don't think due to any fault of this book, I do not think it had the impact that certainly I hoped it would on the sort of working class jobs arena. Things have changed over the years, but I don't think quite to the extent that this book had the potential to lead things to change. And change in that type of thing, I think, is also just very difficult to manifest and certainly can't be done with just one book. But if there was any book that could, I think it was this. I don't know how well this book would hold up to today because it is a nonfiction work that was very much based on what was going on at the time. However, sadly, a lot of what it talked about is still going on, just in different ways. This is an excellent book. I actually still own my copy of it, and maybe someday I'll give it a reread. Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised that this is on here. I don't know why. This was a four-star read for me. I think it was one of the first, if not the first books I read this year, and I really enjoyed it. It dragged a little bit in the middle for me. But other than that, I thought it was a very fascinating concept that she talked about in terms of like time and life, and I thought it was well handled. And yeah, one of the best books of the 21st century. Again, I'm kind of like, okay, maybe. I think it's a really good book, but it was not a five-star read for me. But it is a book that I would recommend to other people. It is a chunky book, so that could definitely be a turnoff to some people. But I would say the vast majority of the book is well paced and moves pretty quickly. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I feel like this is one of her most controversial books, just in terms of either people seem to love it or hate it. There seems to be like a lot of mixed opinions about this book, which seems unusual for Donna Tartt. Most people seem to love her work. This is probably one of her books that people disagree on the most. I do own this. It's on my own TBR. I'm really looking forward to getting to it. I think it's one that I personally will really find fascinating and really enjoy. I've read the first couple of pages a couple of times, and I'm definitely intrigued by her writing style. And I really look forward to getting to this book, and hopefully that will happen sometime soon. This one, I could see how it could make it onto this list, and especially partway through it. I think it's in the 50s or 40s. Yeah, 46. So I could definitely see how this book could end up on this list. Not only did it win the Pulitzer, but I feel like it's a book that has been talked about a lot. And I feel like it's a book that I'm not sure what the publishing date is. I'll put that on the screen. But despite when it was published, I feel like it's one that's still widely read every year and continues to be talked about in multiple spheres. The Fifth Season is my fourth book that I have read off this list, and I'm happy to see a fantasy novel on here. I feel like lists like this often tend to be solely literary fiction, and up to this point, this list has been pretty much all literary fiction. And just from what I have heard from the fantasy and sci fi world, I would say that my understanding is that not only was this a really good book, but it was very influential and a radical break from what was typically being done in fantasy. I know this is a much beloved book on BookTube, especially in the fantasy area, and is one of those books that a lot of people are like, oh, if you read any, slightly more modern fantasy, this is a book that you've got to read. That said, I thought it was really good. Of all the fantasy books that I've read, and I'm not like crazily wide read in fantasy, but of all the ones that I have read, this was not my favorite, but I did think it was a solid book in some ways. I know the main thing that people hype about this book is the unusual perspective of using a second person narrator. Um, I thought that was an interesting change. I don't know that it's worth all the hype that it's gotten just for that. Okay, The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolano. This is actually a very recent purchase for me. I don't recall what it was that finally made me decide to buy this book, but it's been one that has been on my radar for a couple of years now. And I recently just read something and heard about a better non spoiler read description of it that really kind of pushed it over the edge for me and made me go, okay, fine. Like, let me buy this book, let me read it. So this is another book on my own TBR, just barely coming in. And the funny thing is, whatever I heard about it, I heard after this list came out, but wasn't related to the New York Times list. Like somebody wasn't talking about it, the New York Times list itself. They, I think, were just talking about translated works or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's keep going. I also own Sing 'em Buried Sing. I have not read this yet. I've read nothing by Jessamine Ward up to this point, but I do hear her name going around over and over again. This is a book that I really don't know that much about, but I think I picked up just because I had been hearing so much about this author. I kept seeing this book on people's TBR, and I'm pretty sure I came across it one day in a little free library. Either that or a library haul, but either way, someplace where it only cost me about 50 cents or less to purchase. And I said, sure, let me give it a try. So at some point, I'll give it a try. But it's interesting that this book is so high up on this book list because I'm thinking about it compared to like the Goldfinch or even Station 11. And I feel like I don't hear about Sing 'em Buried Sing anywhere near as much as those two books. So, or even the fifth season. So to me, it's fascinating that this is coming in at number 30, well above some of those other books. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This is a book that I first heard about on BookTube. It is on my own TBR. I am looking forward to reading this. I almost buddy read it earlier this year, but then we put it off a few. Coda, are we still buddy reading this? Because we don't have that much longer left. And yeah, I've heard very mixed things about this book. Some people really love it. Some people are really thrown off by the structure of the book and hate it. I don't tend to mind like interconnected stories or books that sort of like flow in and out of themselves structurally. So I think I'll be okay since that seems to be the main complaint. I don't think that will bother me, especially since I know to expect that to happen. But we'll see what my experience is once I actually read it. Okay, interesting as the numbers are getting lower and we're getting closer to the top 10, I have more and more of these books on my own TBR. Americana is a book that has gone on and off my TBR in general. And again, I think is another book that I either picked up at a free library sale or at a library sale or a little free library. Because it's one that I've even taken out of the library on and off. And I like the idea of what this book talks about, but for some reason, when it comes time to finally put it on my TBR and potentially read it, I just don't get to it. So we'll see if that happens when it comes up and how I like it from there. Currently, once we hit under 30, there are a lot of books on this list that I do want to read. Atonement is another book that I keep hearing about that keeps going on and off my TBR, but that I do currently own. It's one that fortunately is really easy to find it everywhere. So even though I've picked it up at a little free library and put it back in a little free library, I found it again in a little free library. And I probably just need to finally read this book. Okay, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. I am actually going to count this book twice. I have both read this book and it's on my own TBR, and I plan to reread the book most likely in October or November because in November I am going to see the opera of The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Yes, that's right. There's an opera of it, which I can't even start to imagine. which just makes me even more excited to go and see it. I personally really enjoy opera. I read this book, I think back in high school, and recall really liking this book. And I've always wanted to reread it, but I've just been kind of putting it off. So now is the perfect opportunity. I'm super excited to reread this book and discuss it with the people that I'm going to the opera with, and to then just see the opera of this. I think it's going to be mind blowing. I also own and want to read Pachinko. This book and the topic of it really fascinated me even from when I first heard about it. I think it was probably when the National Book Award finalist list came out or something like that. And yeah, I still haven't gotten around to it. I don't know why I'm dragging my feet. It's a lot of things that I find really fascinating, family sagas, just cultural like conflict, as well as a nice big chunky book. So hopefully I will get to this book sometime in the next year, but I have very high hopes for it, despite the fact that it seems like people either love it or think it's just meh. So, coming in just inside the top 10 at number 9 is Never Let Me Go by Kazu Ishiguro. I read this last year, I believe, and it was a reread for me, I realized. And I have to admit, this is one of his books that I don't really get the hype over. Like, I think it's interesting, but there's just things about this book that I can't quite put my finger on that I don't know, I just didn't like it as much as I could. I think it was one of those books where, because there's mysterious things that are going on that are intentionally being withheld and not revealed until the very end of the book, I just didn't enjoy it. That's a trope that I sometimes enjoy, but not always. It has to be really well done. And in this one, to me, it just felt like we were just dragging out this secret endlessly. Um, and by the end of the book, like, I thought what was going on was horrifying, but I don't know that it was worth all the buildup. Maybe I didn't even feel like it was built up to that point. I don't know. I thought it was okay. Number 7, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I read this year and absolutely loved. I thought this was a phenomenal book, and I totally think it deserves spot 7 and to be in the top 10 on this list. I definitely think it was a book that was popular not just because of the content, but because of his approach of discussing the Underground Railroad and how he used that to talk about America's history in regards to slavery and just a variety of other topics. This novel was pretty like disturbing in a lot of manners, very like magical realism in other ways. And there were some parts that I was kind of like, I felt like I needed more answers to some of the questions that I had in terms of what was going on and why things were included. I do feel like one of the faults in this book was he talked about some things that were going on in that time period just to talk about them and not because they were really related to the plot of his book. And so I thought that was probably its weakest point. That said, overall, I still thought it was a really good book. However, I can think of some other books that I've read that talks about history of African Americans and the African American situation in general that have come out in the 21st century that honestly I would say are better than this book. So there's that. But it is a book that I would definitely recommend to just about any reader. Okay, 2666 by Roberto Bolano. Again, this is the second book by him on this list that I've noticed, and is also a book that I own. I actually bought this book long before I bought The Savage Detectives. It's been on my TBR. I am partially intimidated and partially super interested in reading this book. I absolutely am fascinated by the cover of this book and by the topic of this book in general. I have heard a lot of things about how important this book is, how long awaited it was for it to be translated into English, which I believe now has happened multiple times. It's an international bestseller. Its spot on this list makes sense to me, even though I feel like it's a book that I very rarely hear people talk about widely. I feel like there's a very narrow scope of people who read this book or know about this book and enjoy it. So I think that may be, I don't know, a flaw in the design of this list. And also, is it intentional that it's number 6 on here? Number 5, The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. I read this way back when it first came out, and there was a whole controversy about the Oprah's Book Club and the sticker being on the book or not on the book, which I feel like stickers being on books or not is still a controversial topic. But he was, I feel like, one of the first authors to actually say something about it. Um, I have read this book. I don't remember anything about it. I don't even recall vaguely being like, oh, this was good or I liked it. And from what I have heard other people say about it more recently, I don't know that I would enjoy it. I feel like I am like 60-40 with the 60% thinking I probably won't like it. So I have no plans to reread this anytime soon. Quickly running out of memory on my computer. So The Known World I is on my own TBR. It is a book that I really want to read and get to, hopefully with my family members. I read the first couple of pages of this, I think last year, was very intrigued, and I'm just waiting for an opportunity to get back to it. And that brings us to number 1 and 2. Number 2 being Wolf Hall, which is a book that I'm likely to never read. I'm just not that interested in historical fiction. And I've heard that if you don't know enough history, in a lot of ways, that book can be less than thrilling and not worth the hype. Number 1 is My Brilliant Friend, and I have to be honest, I DNF'd this book. I started reading it, and honestly, I was just bored to tears, despite the fact that this book is so extremely hyped. So let's quickly just talk about the outcome of things. Hopefully, my numbers are correct. But if I am, out of the 100 books on this list, I have read a total of 8. So about as low as I expected. I will say, as I scrolled through, and maybe I should have included this in here, I saw quite a few books that I actually DNF'd. Some of them much further along than others, like for instance, My Brilliant Friend. Editing me will maybe put up on the screen a few of the others that I catch real quickly that I know I made a decent attempt at the book, like 50 or more pages, and then decided to DNF. So that's also really interesting. Maybe I'll even go back and put on the screen for you how many of the books on this list I've actually DNF'd. At the end of the day, it somewhat concerns me. I own 12 books off this list that I've bought on my own, not knowing this list was going to come out, that I want to read and still really want to read. And I think this is making me a little skeptical. So let's get into the topic of, are lists like this worth it? Is it worth having somebody else put out a list of books and say, these are the best books? I always feel like according to who. And I will give New York Times the credit that they did tell according to who. They were very open and transparent about how they collected this list and put it together. They did also do a reader's version, which was more or less so open to anyone who wanted to participate to contribute books. But I feel like reading is so personal and so individualistic in terms of how you will respond to a book and whether you will like it and what people like in general. It's just a very subjective area is reading. And so I don't know that it's really possible to come up with a comprehensive list of books that everyone should read. That said, I do think they're really exciting. I just think you sometimes have to search around and find the list that's for you. So, what is my plan going forward? Well, at this point, because I feel like there's so many books that I've read and thought were okay, or read and DNF'd, I think I need to be a little more cautious about some of the books that are on this list, which I don't know if it's fair. Like, should I judge all the books on this list as if they're all this going to be the same type of book and I'm going to have the same reaction? I don't know. But my plan as of right now is to be intentional about reading the 12 books on this list that I do enjoy. And then maybe at some point, once I've finished all 12 of those, I'll come back and do an update and figure out what my average rating of all the books on this list are. And then I'll go from there as to whether or not I'm going to read more of them or whatever. But at least I'll have a better feel for what my thoughts are on all 100 of these books. It still won't be all 100. Let's be honest. To my 8, I'll be adding 12. So it'll be 20 of the books off this list. Still not even a quarter of them. Um, But yeah, I don't know. I think book lists can be really fun, but I think they have to stay in that place of fun. Fun, something to reference, something to look at to see what other people are reading and what other people have liked. But personally, I think recommendations are better from friends and family who know you and know your reading style. So that brings me to the invitation I want to extend, which is, if you are watching this video and you like my videos, or you followed along, or you've joined me in my any of my reading longs, whatever it may be, you probably have a pretty good idea of what books I would like and what I might enjoy reading. And so I'm going to open this up to all of my viewers, anyone seeing this even, is to make recommendations to me of books that I think that you think I should read. They can be books off of this top 100 list or not, but I am just looking for books that basically viewers think that I would enjoy. And I'm going to start building a list of the top 100 books for me. Is that really self centered? It probably is. But I feel like I'm open to book recommendations, but I guess I want them a little more curated than this particular list feels like it is. Also, I think it's really fun to read books that other people have liked and enjoyed, but that are coming specifically from a individual person. And so maybe a little bit easier to figure out why they enjoyed it and anticipate whether or not I will enjoy it. So, those are my thoughts on all of that. Comment below if you would like to have your choice added to my list. And I'm literally just going to take the first 100 books that I get and put them on. No repeats because that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So, yeah, that's it for me. Let me know how many books you've read off of this list, if you think it's worth it, and if there's any books on this list that you have DNF'd, and what you think of the books that are the 12 that I have. Like, do you feel like those are a good 12? Whatever. That's a lot of questions to ask. The main thing I want to know is what do you think I should read? And yeah, I'll talk to you next time. Bye.